Welcome to the Ubermenschen podcast. Our mission is to provide content which fosters the expanding human consciousness in order to make us our individual and collective best selves. If you appreciate our show, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. And please leave a comment below. Without further ado, I give you the Ubermenschen. Today we are going to be interviewing Lori Moore, who I flew down to our studio and put her up.
The living room.
Yeah, from the living room, and I put her up for the last 20 years just to get to this podcast. No, seriously, Lori has a couple of really interesting things to bring to the table, and since this podcast is about becoming our greatest versions, about expanding consciousness and awareness, and just all around evolution, I would say. I think anything that falls into that category needs to be spoken about, and she provides a good tune-up for our next interview. Not that we're skipping ahead. So the
a good segue. What's the next interview?
Brandon Joe Williams.
Oh, with him.
Yes.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Yeah. So anyway, one other thing I do want to clean up is my Freudian slip in our first episode about Ubermensch being a young term, when in fact it's a Friedrich Nietzsche term for the one person that did call me out on Rumble. There was one person that made a point to call me out. So it was a Freudian slip.
You called yourself out.
Yeah. I did.
You got called out?
I did.
Got called out?
That's okay.
Well,
I mean, I could. That's kind of a big deal.
No one likes a Weisenheimer.
I know, right?
I'm just kidding. It's one Wiseman.
Right.
And of course, we screwed that up. Yeah, there will be more of that.
I have no doubt. All right. Well, without any further ado,
you better ask me a question. I can't just launch.
Oh no, I'm going to. So when I briefly touched on our story last time, and I mentioned how the one series of books that we encounter really
Uber mentioned.
I Uber mentioned that. Wow, we're gonna get miles out of that. No, I mentioned that the series of books that we really sort of propelled us into this major transformation and to the location that we're in and the way of life that we're going about. And that series of books obviously was the Ringing Cedars of Russia. And that book served as a huge inspiration for you specifically. And it inspired you to do all sorts of crazy things, like buy a bus and move into that bus in a foreign to you location, and just like kind of very radical transformation. But one of the big aspects of our change was having our last two children at home and unassisted, and that was pretty much Lori's go. I mean, it was all her that wanted to go in that. So I definitely want to share that story with couples or mothers or even fathers who are, like wanting to, or at least thinking about it. And maybe they've never heard anyone actually speak openly about it, because there's not a lot of people that do. So I guess that's the direction I would like to take this first before we get into your class, since we're born before we can homeschool.
Sure.
So why don't you go ahead and just give us a little background on what inspired you to go down that road, considering that our first child was born as conventional as possible, and you can even share that if you would like it. So I'll just let you kind of.
Well, after reading the Ringing Cedars series and hearing how eloquently described was a natural home birth and the type of ceremony that can surround that, and how this type of unfoldment of the birthing process used to take place, and still does in some areas, in places where childbirth is very sacred and not systematic, not inherently a medical emergency, but obviously something that humans do and have done for as long as we've been here. The idea that childbirth kills us is counterintuitive, but it was the idea of the beauty surrounding a beautiful birth that drew me to it so much that I felt doing it any other way would be irresponsible. So a lot of people approached me as we were getting ready for our first home birth, our first unassisted, and I will tweak that even more to say uninterrupted home birth. They would call out all the usual concerns, all the same questions, and just really concerned about our choice and the dangers that they thought were inherent. And even though I wasn't always able to articulate my views on that to that person that was asking me, to those people that were asking me, the dialogue in my own mind was, this is the only way I can do this at this point. My inner compass and my conviction at this point will not allow me to, unless I felt like I was having a medical emergency, couldn't allow me to head to a hospital and have my baby there. I felt like I was robbing my child of a better experience, a better start, a better launch, a better reception. And that included, or what it helped do is build up a protective space around us, the birthing parents, and the child, and all of the other non-essential aspects of traditional medical birth, from the silver nitrate that gets rubbed in the baby's eyes in case the mother has gonorrhea, which I'm sure it could be tested for ahead of time, and the poking and the prodding and the testing and the sweeping away of the baby at birth to not necessarily bond and nurse on the mother right away, but most atrociously, horribly, and grotesquely in my mind is the systematic scheduling of births that is so completely normalized now. So completely normalized it is,
especially in this region,
to write on your calendar when the day that you're going to the doctor to have your baby removed. This is in stark comparison to how natural childbirth actually unfolds. So if you actually skip over that first crucial physiological step, you've broken a chain of links, physiological links that begin the birthing process and bring it to complete fruition when you pass the placenta. So there's a lot of details to go into there, and I get really excitable, but I love the fact that we did that, and that you were there for both of those births, supportive and unnerving. You were the perfect host, the perfect companion, in that you did not insert yourself to find yourself there as a savior or helper or facilitator. You were there as a holder, a cradler, on-demand assistant when called for.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not, there isn't a lot for me to do until, there's like a physical person present. And, before I get into that, it's also important to note that, like, we weren't young when we went about this. On the first one, we were in the latter part of our 30s, when Marshall was born. And, for a lot of people, that's like, oh, you're already getting too old, and with Escher, we were 42.
We were 41 when we were intentionally conceiving him.
Right. But we can get to that too if you'd like.
We just did.
Okay. But
like, it was all, planned. We're 41, like, yeah, one other baby. Yep. Okay. So we.
Right. there was a plan for sure in place there. But with the first go around with Marshall, there's not a lot of information, at least from the male side of things out there. I've stumbled across a blog that some gentleman in Alaska wrote, and like all of the worst stuff that could have happened to that family did happen, and they didn't lose any children. But like there was a baby born breech, and one of them had the cord wrapped around its head, and so there was a lot of, and they had to take a plane to the nearest hospital, so the hospital wasn't even an option. So in that situation, it is kind of like you do or die. We certainly weren't in that. We did have someone who was a nurse that was on call, if you will, but still,
Who was that?
it was a friend. It was a friend of Mom's who
put her on call.
She put herself on call.
Okay.
She said to us over and over again. But anyway, it doesn't matter.
Oh, okay.
I'm doing this.
Yeah. Right.
Wipe the crap out of this. Nice to meet you.
Right.
Well, like both times after I'd given birth and I was waiting for the placenta to pass, it was like a phone tag. Everybody was asking, did she pass the placenta? Da 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 da. Oh my goodness! Someone better call an ambulance and send it over there. The notions around this process are so obscured, so tainted with fear. It's not at all what the nursing students are being.
What was the number one concern that, resounding concern that people vocalized to you?
In the whole birthing process?
Yeah.
Oh, it was just a generalized statement. What if something happens?
It was always, what if something goes wrong?
Yeah.
Well, there are a lot of things that can go wrong, but something that's important to point out is that Lori spent a good month longer than that, but a good month prior to delivery of like doing specific exercises and getting your body really in the
toned. I did that for 9 months, but what you're thinking of, I think, is how I kept belly mapping to see if the baby was in the right position. And so you can really figure the position of the baby out when you learn how to do that. And up until I watched a video on how to do that, I'm like, I don't know what's the feet and what's the head, but eventually I did learn this. And the day before I felt like I was going to go into labor, I thought, he just went, I forget what it's called, but he was facing the wrong way, which is a type of breech. And I don't mean like upside down, just posterior. And he was just, and babies come out like in a twist. So when they come out in this twist, you want their nose to be facing your backside and not your pubic bone. And so he would have been if I had just left him in that position. So there's a type of like almost like yoga that you do, and I successfully was able to put him in the right placement, and then he stayed that way the next day, and I went into labor. And these are all things that you learn, and there's definitely things that you would avoid. So there was a certain diet that I followed all the way through, and this helped condition my body and mostly avoid congestion, tight ligaments. So, everyone thinks that a baby is too big to come out, and that's what the movies are showing these young girls, and that's what everybody's being told. Oh, this big ball has to come out of something the size of something or other. It's like we accommodate that. We accommodate that, and in the moment with the right physiological chain of events, you relax, you accept, and you open, and you release. And of course it's meant to happen that way. But when you are constricted and you're tight and you're scared and you're holding on for dear life and you think there's no way that this baby could pass out of you because I've normally not open like that, then you're going to be afraid and you are going to be restrictive. But following a certain diet will really help you in that final week be fluid and stretchy. And especially that day. And so if we've answered your question about people's fears and things, which is
nobody ever really gave us a direct thing. There were a few like, oh, what if the baby comes out, breech, or
what? The number one.
Right.
Oh yeah, so there's something I wanted to comment about that. I think there's ways to help avoid, in some cases that I've heard of, I feel like the breech situation could have been avoided, and not just by doing exercises, but by not doing so many exercises in your daily life. So I know in these What to Expect When You're Expecting, those books, they pretty much make it sound like whatever you were doing before you became pregnant, you can keep doing as long as it isn't like drugs and alcohol, and whatever you like to eat, so on and so forth. And I don't agree. And so if you like doing cartwheels, and you were doing cartwheels up until you got pregnant, or if you're a weightlifter, things like that, I picked up on enough cues of my own body that you should not be doing cartwheels nor weightlifting while you're pregnant. I know women do it. I've seen it. I've seen the pictures, and still, that's my 2 cents about that. But when you're doing log rolls, and if you're a person that rolls while they sleep, don't just turn left. Sometimes turn right. Like if you turn on your left side, when you go to your right side, you turn, you know what I'm saying? Like you don't want to keep doing spins throughout your pregnancy. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But we could go through all those nuances. I don't think it's that type of podcast. But mainly it was the fears, and we're trying to, I think, get to the psychology of all that. And for me, I got to a point very quickly that it felt like the only right way to go about things. And it didn't matter how many people, try to coach us out of that decision.
Well, up to that point, people had been trying to talk us out of just about everything we were trying to do. So in that sense, it was very much more of a attention.
Yeah. And I know that because I personally know you two. I know, for the viewers, like you aren't haphazard people. That's just like, oh, what happens to the baby happens to the baby. Or with anything in life. I mean, I do feel like we all deal with a lot of criticism that we have to wade through. And it's for the most part coming from a good place.
Sure, it's care.
It comes from a good place, and it comes from a place of fear. Both of those things coupled and intertwined, and we have to dissimulate it and live our lives anyway. But we do take into account what people say, and it's home birth. It ain't no joke at the same time, and but I know that you guys, that it's not haphazard if that's how it comes across to anybody.
No, and realistically,
there was still a level of nervousness there because, I mean, my goodness, it's like one of the biggest parts of life you're going to be. There's gonna be.
But anymore, walking into a hospital makes me nervous, and so to basically bring all that back home, when people said, what if something happens? My inner dialogue was, what if something happens in the hospital? The only thing that changes in those two situations is that if it happens in the social liability no longer falls on my shoulders. I won't be rejected, ousted, and called out by my peers because I followed the normal standard procedure. So if anything happens, it wasn't my fault. But I wasn't interested in whose fault it was. I was interested in a successful birth. And if I wanted a successful birth, I was going to opt to birth at home, where I knew the statistics were better for a good outcome. Because statistically speaking, things happen in hospitals all the time.
Right.
And the lasting effects of certain procedures done in hospitals are long lasting and not always very apparent.
Right. Right. Well, I know on the first experience, at least I can speak of, my perspective as the dad in it, obviously, it's one of those, it's going to happen. It's inevitable. And we had a good idea of when it was, and we had gone through, we did have prenatal checkups and things like that. Although that was difficult. That was actually also difficult because
two.
Right.
Because I wanted an ultrasound to make sure I didn't have twins.
Right.
Because I thought I had twins. And then
I remember that
I didn't do any prenatal appointments with Escher because I had a friend who had an ultrasound machine. But now that I know what ultrasound does, and it's not actually sonar waves, it's radiation, I wouldn't do that again.
Well, the experience, at least from my side of things, that when she told me that it was like go time, and that I think you said, I think it's time to take the girls to your mom.
This is talking about the first one.
With Escher, or with Marshall rather.
Yeah.
And like, if someone were to hit a stop clock or a stopwatch from the time I walked out and brought the girls over to mom's and came back, and was holding Marshall, it was like an hour and 10 minutes. I mean, everything happened so fast. The labor was fast. I want to say it was like 2 or 3, like, okay, I've got to push, type things. And on the second one, his head came out. And when you push, all of the fluids and everything that was in his nose and mouth came out. And the third push, I had him. I caught him and he started crying, and he was perfect.
And I don't mind telling you all that I was in a vertical position. So gravity is a huge, has a big role in natural childbirth. And so when Jeremy, looking at this infant that's emerging and sees that the natural contractions will put enough pressure on this emerging infant to actually have him express all this fluid out of his nasal cavity and mouth. This is just one of those links in those chain of physiological events that should not be interrupted.
No, to me, okay, so as a dad, and having been a dad before, and you are too now, Clayton, so when the baby is born, the dad's like, oh, look, it's the baby, and you get to hold the baby or see the baby or whatever, and then they usher you out of the room, and we don't get to see what goes down after that. And there's like, childbirth is a 2-part process. Well, it's more than that, but the actual delivery is a 2-part process. I had no idea, and there was no. I mean, I have an idea, but I didn't have.
Not 2-party.
No, 2-part.
So what are the 2 parts?
The baby comes first, and then the placenta,
which is a whole nother
delivery
birthing process.
Right.
In natural childbirth, I would say. Now, I've heard of other women having natural childbirth, and for them, the placenta comes out within 5 or 15 minutes. And for me, on both occasions, it's completely different, and there's nothing wrong or incorrect or biologically faulty about that. But I could do a whole podcast on just placenta and birthing one.
We were even with the first time around, we were doing like live or real-time research even. Not that we hadn't researched it before.
No, I hadn't though.
Well, but not that we hadn't thought about it before, but then, you're like, okay, but the placenta is supposed to happen, like within an hour, and all of the medical things say if it's not in 30 minutes, it's an emergency. Call 911, fly a helicopter in, it's over.
Right. Yeah.
But you also then found this English lady who was a midwife, and she explained like in depth that with some women it was very fast and with others it was not. But the most important thing was to not push on her stomach or try and force
no pushing
it to happen.
or pulling on the umbilical cord,
because everything is closing off and those blood vessels are detaching and the blood is shutting down. And
so I think this is a huge part of it. I think maybe one of the reasons why now that I'm thinking about it, like in the moment, one of the reasons why women pass the placenta very quickly is because the cord is cut earlier. And certainly in medical births, the cord is cut right away. And then there's a nurse there shortly after to push your belly in like your tube of toothpaste and like smoosh this out of your abdomen. And then this large sloppy organ, like it comes out of you. But in this natural physiological chain of events, Jeremy and I, we let that umbilical cord pump blood and nutrients into our baby
flaccid
until the cord was flat and cold and completely done. And how is all that being pumped into the baby? The placenta is still, it's in the uterus, but the placenta itself contracts. So it begins contracting. And for me, it contracted all of its goodness out and through the umbilical cord into my child, that now it was a denser, firmer version of what it was. And that wasn't going to make its way out very quickly at this point. So for me, I had to wait 2 hours with the first one and some 4 hours with the second one for the placenta within me, and I was having contractions for 4 hours, to condense itself and contract itself into a softball-sized and softball density organ, and be delivered with contractions, natural contractions, the kind that you, like, I didn't force it. Like I was having contractions, just like having a baby. So that was something I learned, and not a lot of people know about that whole process. So I was asked to speak in front of 2 nursing classes about my first birth. And that was
by the head
rewarding.
of the nursing program. Like, she thought it was so important to hear, for young nurses to hear that, hey, it isn't always this like very mechanized process. It's, you know, like the natural way is very different, and you should hear about it, you know.
But I'll tell you, and everyone listening again and again, it's the uninterrupted physiological chain of events from A to Z that really allow for success and a satisfying, healthy birth. So not all this interruption or well-meaning caretakers there to ask you what you need and brush your hair and do all the things. Unless the mother asks for it, we really just need to be in a flow state, in a selfish bubble flow state.
Yeah. I wonder if, I think a lot of the psychological effects of modern births, I'm wondering along the lines of postpartum depression, and maybe the hospital environment has something to do with that. And my wheels just got turning thinking about the delivering of the placenta, because I can't help but always look for some deeper symbolism, even in
Let's hear it.
Even in an organ. Well, I don't know. I mean, my initial visions I'm getting is just of maybe the placenta symbolizing, and the passing of the placenta, natural delivery of the aspect of mother that is no longer having to carry this thing internally and do the bodily functions internally to house this thing. You know, maybe if it's rushed along, maybe, I don't know if there's chemical, physiological, spiritual, emotional reactions that are taking place by rushing along the passing of the placenta, which it seems like is kind of happening.
Well, that makes sense. That makes sense.
I don't know, but it's just a crazy theory. I'm just.
For me, even the disposal of it, like this bond between you and your child, goes into a red plastic biohazard bag, and then probably sold to the pharmaceutical company.
Right.
And then, so that kind of breaks my heart looking back at my daughter's births, and the boys' placentas are both tucked in the soil of our yard. We know those exact locations, and we planted a tree on one, and the other one was planted at the base of a tree. So
very cool.
Yeah. As you know.
One other thing that I think is interesting and worth mentioning, this is one of the very few times in my life where I can say, like, I could feel another person's energy, like physically feel the energy. So when she was having contractions, when she was talking about being in a flow state, and it was like pretty much at the peak of it all, like right before she was about to deliver, I could literally feel the waves of energy coming off of her. And so it was like, and I don't mind sharing this either, even though it's sort of an intimate situation and moment, but it's like, I felt like I was moving energy off of her, you know, like all of these waves of contractions that were coming off. I could feel it. And I was just kind of like, without actually physically touching her, I was like moving energy off of her. And that's the first time in my life that I ever experienced that connection, you know, like where you can feel someone else's energy and you realize that you're consciously directing it. And it had a physical effect. Like it had a effect on her. And it was like, it was really the only thing I could do, you know, because while she's in that state, like I can only imagine what it's like to, for your,
be in a flow state. So
right, not like a oh my god, I'm gonna die, or
no,
it wasn't like that at all. It was
intense.
Nothing negative. It was intense,
and so I needed to be allowed to stay in the intensity. And so he was just perfect. But I had asked him to just float his hands over my back as I was facing him on my knees. And I asked him to float his hands over my back from shoulder to hips without so many details. I didn't give him all those instructions. Like, just float your hands on my back. But don't touch me.
Right, yeah, right.
Don't touch me, we'll do this.
Right.
And it was like Reiki. So he, at one time, had his own idea and went up with his hands, and it was jarring. But he wasn't touching me. But I felt it, and it was jarring. I was like, no, don't go that way. Just down. And so then he did that, and I was like, oh. So it helped allow all the energy to move in this one direction, this toroid, I imagine, right? Down and out.
Yeah, it was, well, again, you know, and the second time around, and that's not to, and this is not to take anything away from Escher's birth or that, but now it's like, it isn't that it's old hat. It's that okay, well, we've done this. And now a lot of the fears and the anxiety and things that go along with something like this weren't as present. It was more like, okay, we're going to do this. We've done it before. It was different. It wasn't as fast. And
it was hot.
And it was hotter. It was in August. So, you know, like, it's hot out in our, well, you know, we don't, it's hot here. And
since it didn't happen in an hour.
Right. It was a little longer. It was just, you were a little more fatigued in the bigger picture. When we were older, and, you know, and all around, it was just it was still a very positive experience. There wasn't anything about it that was even remotely like, oh God, I'm glad that's done.
Except for the placenta taking 4 hours.
Yeah, that
and
definitely.
Then people calling in helicopters almost.
Yeah. I mean, I.
But even then, I was still in a type of flow state. There's a physiological chain. What helped the placenta come out? Someone pushing on my stomach? No. Someone rattling in my ear? Congratulations? No. The nursing baby. It's a critical element. The breastfeeding, the nursing, the latching on, the closeness, the bonding. As much as the father and everyone else wants to hug on the baby, and of course Jeremy, you know, did, but briefly, ever so briefly, the child belongs at the mother's breast to help complete that chain of physiological events. The birth begins with chemicals in the baby's brain. The child is the one that initiates birth, by the way, with hormones from the infant's own body that begins the birthing, the contractions in the mom. But I felt it that morning with Escher for sure. I woke up that morning and I was just laying there and I felt charged and giddy and nervous. Charged, giddy, and nervous. I was like, oh, something's different. I was still laying down, so I hadn't done any, like, I hadn't checked my pulse or my temperature or anything like that. And then I sat up and stood up and some like water released. I was like, yep, I'm right. Today's the day.
Yeah. I think I remember Marshall's. I was there for Marshall's. I mean, not there in the house with you guys. I was, if you recall, and Escher's. I believe that I was with my mother, with my daughter's mother, living in a different place at that time. But Marshall's was just like, it was beautiful. You guys had a fire that was pre-built, which was going to be our signal. And if you remember, a friend of mine that I was in a band with at the time was over when I was living on the bus, and you came over beforehand. We were hanging out for a little bit. I remember you saying, like, I kind of just feel like it might be today. Like, it could have been any time. We had thought that, you know, all week everybody was like, is it going to happen now?
Right.
And you went and took a shower, and your two oldest daughters came over to be like, Dad, it's go time, basically, as I remember you telling it.
Okay, yep.
And I believe that our mother had texted me, and my bandmate that I was with, like, when he found out it was like going down, like after like 30 minutes, he's like, we need to go over there. I'm like, we are not going over there. Like, we're gonna wait for this fire to be lit. That's gonna be the signal. All should be well. And gosh, I want to say it was like, it couldn't be more than 45 minutes. It wasn't an hour. That I do remember. So fast. And when we saw the fire, we were like, woo! And he's like, can we go over there now? And I'm like, no, we can't go over there now.
Oh, he's so sweet.
Funny.
Yeah, he is sweet. But yeah, it was really magical, and I was divinely inspired, but I guess not enough. I had my own hangups at the time when my child was born. I wasn't as accountable of a person anyway. Not that I wasn't there. It was the most, even in the hospital, it was the single most beautiful, trippiest experience I've ever had thus far on this earth. I don't think it can ever be topped. I don't know. It was just
No, I agree,
and
man.
I was in it as the doctors would let me be. I was like, "Can I catch it?" And they were kind of patching on it, like, "Sure, Dad, you can," And I was like, we were very, very watchful in the hospital too, because we didn't want to do any vaccinations, which is a separate story. So there wasn't any. I can't think of one instance while we were there that either I or the mother were separated from the child, and it was a cool enough thing. But I wish Well, I don't wish anything. If I could do it again, I would feel comfortable now and equipped to doing it at home, because I feel like I'm more equipped of an individual all around, And at the time, I think subconsciously I knew that I wasn't, I had my own selfish hangups about sometimes some of the negative thoughts we have and the fears associated around, having a kid. And honestly, that's where I was at. So.
But she's very strong and empowered too, and she had a plan, and she stuck to it. He sticks up for her.
Yes.
The protection of you and her, the baby, and all that.
Yeah. It was a beautiful thing regardless. But we also weren't the type of people that were just going to go in and do anything at the doctor's behest. We actually kind of went in there with our gloves on, expecting having to do more than we did, and we're very fortunate because some people do not have that experience, and they do have to fight for autonomy over their bodies and their children's bodies, which is absolutely asinine, and we could get into that. But I want to move things along to the full spectrum course now, and that seemed like a natural segue, and that's good. We've been wanting to talk about that. I want to make sure that on your end it's still recording, because my end is not.
Yeah, I'm recording. It gets both ends.
Okay, good, because mine won't be recording anymore. And,
okay.
Anyway, sorry if that was a harsh segue, but
no, it's all good.
No, it sounds good.
So we have 4 children, and we chose to homeschool, and a lot of the things that we chose to do were just personal conviction, and we were kind of ahead of the trends. And it's kind of funny almost how it's all unfolded, like even when we started looking at tiny houses or even living in the bus, like it was before the whole tiny house thing was really cool. It was still one of those things that people looked at you like, tiny house, what are you going to do, or childbirth, homeschool. What makes you think you're, up to, you're not a teacher.
Wow, it's changed in a decade.
Oh, isn't it wild?
Pandemic.
Right.
Well, that's true.
And so, but something that Lori really, and I don't want to speak for you, I'm going to give you my 2 cents, but something that I saw in Lori when we were a part of a co-op, and it was just a small, it was a relatively decent sized amount of people who had, their kids together in a co-op situation where the parents did, they had to teach at least a class. And you did a couple of different classes, and the kids were always like so engaged, and everyone but our kids, of course, because your kids are like, oh, it's mom talking the same crap she always does, But the other people's kids were like actually, they were engaged, and I think that yes, I'm your husband, but I think that you're a really outstanding teacher, and you have a way of delivering the information that is, exciting and engaging, and that kids tend to like. So,
I think you are too.
Well, thanks. But that actually led her into creating this class. It's a more than just a class, but it's called the
Full spectrum course for teens.
For teens.
Did we lose Clayton?
No, he's there. He just signed off for a second. We're good.
Okay. So yeah.
So that class is her new thing. It's
my new offer.
Yeah.
It's my next big project. But in the philosophy of homeschool, though, we homeschooled because we were excited about doing it, passionate about doing it, and honored. And it was not just a privilege; it was our birthright as people to school our own children. So we went into the realm of homeschooling, only to later feel like homeschooling wasn't enough. We needed to unschool, and that's a catchphrase going around now too. And then beyond unschooling, I felt like free schooling was the next step. So homeschooling is something that a lot of people do, but they take the public standardized curriculum and they repackage it, or they just take that package and then go through it at home, the same government standardized education. And simply bringing that into your house and having your child go through it, but at home instead of at school, is the child is in a different setting now, but it's the same material. And yes, for the homeschool parent who wanted to give their child an opportunity to not have to sit in a desk all day or be surrounded by a bunch of kids who tend to be who's raising them now, not adults that you've interviewed and vetted and approved of, but by a bunch of adolescents
or activist teachers. And I mean, that's a whole sort of side anecdote, but TikTok and YouTube are full of these types of people who are, and they're trying to indoctrinate your children, and they're open about it. But anyway.
Yeah. So then unschooling is the next natural progression for a lot of homeschooling families right now, and they realize that they don't even want that curriculum. They're not going to be buying the same textbooks that have been offered all of these years, even when it comes to math. And math is taught differently in a lot of different countries, so that's not very surprising. But then what I'm calling free schooling is something that goes beyond homeschooling and then beyond unschooling, where, and I forgot to mention, unschooling is also deprogramming. So if the things that have stuck to us along the way that isn't serving us, those branches that we need to prune back because they're holding spoiled fruit, it's not good fruit, it's tainted, it's not good food for thought. We need to prune back the branches that hold them, the beliefs that hold these unsupportive beliefs. And so that's what unschooling is for me, is this deprogramming. And this is something that's really by and large something the parents need to do, because most kids aren't even that indoctrinated yet. And then free schooling is an intuitive approach. It doesn't mean not schooling, which a lot of unschoolers using that catchphrase associate with it. For me, it's free schooling is following your intuition and really discerning what's going on, what's really relevant, really important, valuable, meaningful, and serving that up for your family and sourcing wisdom together through your natural course of your day. Where do your interests lead you? And you really can't do that if your time energy is obscured with if it's obscured. And what obscures our time? A lot of TV, media, and sometimes too many scheduled activities. But when I ask myself, when that small part of myself asks myself, who do you think you are? Because I've been asked that by not myself. Who do you think you are? What makes you think you're so smart? What is this you think that you have to offer that you think is better? And I immediately answered myself and said, well, I have a superpower. What's your superpower? That I threw out a TV 13 years ago. Jeremy and I threw out our TV 13 years ago. And that doesn't mean we haven't had access to a screen one way or another, but we haven't had this screen take center place in our living room. And it, honest to God, left all this room open for learning more meaningful things.
Conversation. We're really fortunate to have like good breakfast conversations. Like in general, we do. Like, yeah, there's a lot, bickering and the normal things that go on with kids. But for the most part, like we can sit and have an extended talk together about all kinds of stuff. from history or politics or religion or just like all around life stuff. But it tends to come up in the morning, and we tend to really get into some, like really good stuff, things that you and I didn't have, when we were kids, Clayton. And that's not a shot at our folks, like we grew up in a kind of a different time under different circumstances. And, I'm very grateful for that ability and the time that we have with them to do this.
Yeah. Yeah, the time is a big one, and like you and I know like I'm an especially young man, but even still, we didn't have cell phones. It's funny because I was just now thinking when you were saying all that about for a lot of families, like American families, it's like, well, it used to be anyway, at least for a lot of people, like dinner time. Dinner time is this whole time. How was your day? What did you learn today? Type thing. And for a lot of people, that's like the most interaction that they get with their whole family in a day. And when I think about that, that's sad. And now it's like even less because it's like, wait, what'd you say? And we're all doing it. The adults, the kids, sometimes the adults more than the kids, enamored with this new technology to them that the kids are already probably getting kind of like bored with. But one thing that weighs on me, and I've got a great life, a great day job. My daughter is not schooled at home, but it's not conventional curriculum. Like kid's not going to public school, ain't gonna happen. And very, very lucky that
She had wonderful
she's got adults in her life on the same page about that as well. She's got a good thing. And I gauge how successful we're doing as parents as how happy our daughter seems to be, which for the most part, like happiness seems to be her go-to mode, which is just, that's a good feeling. But I missed her a lot during the day. It feels counterintuitive to be away that much of the time of the day, from away from my kid, from away from myself too, from away from my home, not just these four walls, but I think you know what I mean.
Yes,
and
absolutely. Well, you have to put a different hat on when you're a worker dad or whatever, away from home dad. You're putting on a different.
It doesn't feel like we could all still maintain these jobs that we have, these jobs, but do they necessarily have to be 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, more or less? I mean, a lot of people that are coming up with these online offers, for example, or musicians and authors and the like, can work 4 hours a week maybe and sustain their lifestyle, the lifestyle that they want. And so there's this formula that has most of us stuck in a 8 hour a day, 5 day a week drive time that keeps us separate from our families. So Jeremy and I have chosen to have a one person working at any given time, typically, but we have taken turns over the last 14 years.
Right, where one is more the worker while the other is at home.
Someone's at home.
But that's also where I realize I can't make judgments on anyone that doesn't do that. We're very fortunate. We're on paid off land. We're living in a paid off house, and we drive paid off cars, and they're nothing fancy by any means of any stretch.
It's still hard enough, isn't it?
It's bro. This year especially, like with the cost of things, but I don't want to digress too much. Yeah, things have changed, and I want to circle back to something about homeschooling, at least from my own perspective. And I thought this myself, because my impression of homeschoolers at my age is always they're like the weird, nerdy kids who are eating paint, or like super religious, like way over the top religious. And they all wear like denim skirts and, like the same color shirts or something. Or, they're just super duper awkward. And what I have found is like it couldn't be further from the truth with our kids, as you personally know. Our kids are anything but antisocial or not social. But the other thing that has really been super duper positively shocking for me is like how awesome our kids' friends are, and there's a lot of homeschool kids around here, and they all seem to gravitate towards one another together because they, one way or another, it's not a very large community, so any kind of co-opting ends up, people just know each other. But what is interesting is to watch our kids interact with like public school kids, and the public school kids are very much like you and I were, or we were growing up. Like they have they're chasing boys or girls, they're doing naughty things like boozing or smoking cigarettes, or they're talking about the things that they emphasize are all the same stupid things that we emphasized and thought about. And to like circle this back to what you said about this formula that we are running for this to be a good worker bee and to be a member of society, that all comes to us from school, and that's that's what we learned, and that's why we're having such a difficult time deprogramming ourselves at this stage in our lives, as opposed to like saying to a kid, hey, look, man, it doesn't have to be this way. But it also doesn't mean that you have, with all this free time, that you just get to like lounge around and do nothing. Like that's not how life brings you what you want. So, Lori, then you took all of those philosophies and you started to apply this now to your offer. And I want you to explain in detail, what your offer is, so that people can hear.
So the full spectrum course for teens is a 9-month-long experience. It was originally thought of as a condensed version of the 4-year high school curriculum, wherein I cut all the fat out and just extracted the gems, because there's so much frivolous fluff and trivial information that kids are sitting in their chairs to hear, that I just know and intuitively sense that they are there to be babysat while the parents are off as a cog in the global business model. So there alone, there was just evidence of too much unnecessary stuff being said at these students. Just what a bunch of wasted time. So I thought, well, if we could just extract the gems, get to the essence of the meaning of these history lessons and science and philosophy, and really examine those things very closely. And then I realized this wasn't good enough either. There's almost nothing there of substance. The public curriculum can be completely tossed out. Goodbye. It is rubbish. All of it. And we're going to start fresh. So for parents that have come this far, that they now have teens, and they've been homeschooling, or they just started homeschooling, and they feel like something's off with public curriculum, and they can see that something's off in the world. I mean, there's so much suffering, and we've been looking at it for so long. How do we ever see any real change if we just keep installing the same information into our population? We need something new. We need better information that really aids us in discerning the causes of human disease, so we can move towards true health, as I call it. We really need to get to the bottom of our failures in public infrastructure so that we can move towards true progress in our cities and towns and in our communities. So we can move away from filthy mechanisms that soil our water and our air, obviously. And philosophy helps with us to a great deal, because we will no longer be installing people into those offices and behind those steering wheels and the backhoes. I know they don't have steering wheels in them. Creating these structures that create so much damage in the long run. We will now have new thinkers deciding whether or not they want to join the military or be supporting any part of war, widespread violence. And one of my main missions here, and something I'm designing this to produce successfully, is to enhance the ability to perceive deceit and lies and malevolent narratives. So this course we could say that this is my manipulation, that this is me steering people, but to be able to detect when something is malevolent or truly supportive, whether something resonates with a person. So I don't claim to be a teacher. I am the host. I don't give lessons because I don't want to lessen anybody's intellect. I offer presentations. I instigate inquiry so that the participants, not the students, but the participants can bring questions and put them on their own heart to discern over time at their own pace so that the truth unfolds within them. And this takes a special stacking of the material. So the order that I've placed it in, I feel is in the appropriate order to help these truths unfold within them individually. I do not stand there to tell them what truths are. How could I possibly? In the end, I can offer what conclusions I've come to, what conclusions that will still evolve over time. But to even reframe our vocabulary so we can start creating new neural connections that aren't attached to old beliefs and old habits. So even something as simple as saying, this is my truth now, and allowing that curtain to sort of blow in the wind, to like let new air in every now and then. It's not a closed window. It's just a window, right?
Yeah. No, I understand very much what you mean by that last part too. I think of intellectual strong point in the people that I respect the most in my personal life, people I know, are people that have the willingness and ability to change their ideas or truths when presented with new information that seems to resound truth. And I struggle in this world of facts and figures that really that seem to be in flux, as new things keep coming in. It's, even mathematics, and we could totally go down the weeds like we often do, like it's.
Well, we can go there now.
As simple as 1 + 1 = 2. Well, maybe in the world of nature, it seems that a lot of the time, one thing and another thing make at least a third thing.
Yeah, we have to specify what dimension we're looking for our answer in. I did a whole. I recorded a whole response to Terrence Howard's recent claim that 1 × 1 = 2, and I'm really excited about joining that conversation. So I'll let you know when I finish editing it. But yeah.
Well, I think it's important to state that what you have constructed and what you're offering is beyond just like reading, writing, and math. Like at this point, by the time your child is to like high school age, we're presuming that they know how to read and write and do math. Like what we would prefer or refer to as like the basics, right? As long as you can do the basic stuff, then whatever comes after that is, there's so much more available. And as you know, because we all sort of learned our alternative ideology or ideas, if you will, because at the end of it all, what's it? It's all BS, right? It's all belief systems. And so if belief system is essentially what makes our entire construct, it's how we interpret reality, it's how we find meaning and understanding in our world. And so if we're operating from somebody, and all of it has been handed to us by people who we don't know, and may not have had our best interests, and we know because we've done our own research at this point, is that a whole lot of people who had alternatives to the status quo weren't allowed to be heard, or they were completely erased from the record. And in a lot of cases, some of the bedrock of what your course is, like Walter Russell comes to mind, or Victor Schoberger comes to mind. People who were not mentioned ever. I never heard these people in school. And what they were saying is so counter to what we're told about physics or other areas of science.
And yet people in scientific professions do know of them and do utilize their work, but this isn't taught at the high school level, where it's very inspiring and helps us follow other truths. I believe it's sequestered to certain corners, like this particle collider, and then this is where this kind of information is used, and with cold fusion and some areas of things. But people know about it, but the general public isn't supposed to. So the books are out there. They're not hidden. They haven't been banned. If they were, then we'd know that they had good stuff in them, right? But they were printed in the early 1900s, and I mean, you know, a lot of
Walter
their work.
Russell.
Yeah. And then Victor Schauberger, his life is amazing, and for being such a genius, and he was like he was a forest warden, so he was just an average guy, but making observations in nature, undisturbed. And so that's why even Alec Bartholomew, who authored this book, Hidden Nature, The Startling Insights of Victor Schauberger, he was making these observations, these startling insights under the moon. He learned about all these properties of water, mostly I'd say through observation, but also intuiting it. But his life, he crossed his path with Hitler because Hitler subjugated him. And then later he died of a broken heart when the Allies, the American forces, brought him to America and also wanted to use his knowledge. But
under Operation Paperclip, he was one of the scientists that was scooped up in that operation.
And all he ever wanted to do was sustain the earth before it was too late, to save the forest. He had all sort of solutions for farming so that the soil wouldn't be depleted and that fertilizers wouldn't need to be used. Yeah. He really understood things on multiple levels, on deep levels. But so did a lot of other people that we don't actually look at when we're in school. So people know of Henry David Thoreau. They know of Helen Keller even. And maybe George Washington Carver, some other people that were like, we know of, but we didn't learn like these meaningful things that these people would have said to us if they were sitting in front of us. They wouldn't have said, this is this basic story that we learn in a textbook. They would have said something poetic and from their hearts that would have stayed with us for a lifetime. Right. We would have changed our habits.
Yeah. Yeah, it was very frustrating. Like, I don't do well with dates. Sometimes names, especially dates, though, like recall for tests. And a lot of that, like an example like George Washington Carver, that would be it. Like, what did he invent? When was he born?
All our
when was he died? And not something like you said, something that deeply philosophical that can stay with you forever. And contextually, it's almost like I wonder sometimes if they were devised to learn in a way that breaks the pattern recognition part of our psyche, which I think is just one of the most important and most human human thing about us is pattern recognition, this thing that I think humans do to a heightened extent. And there's not a lot of that going on when you're befuddled with information that, like you said, is just not obsolete. It's becoming so. Well, you said useless or something like that. Like it's wrong.
Frivolous, paltry, trivial, rubbish.
It takes up a lot of brain space, unnecessarily. Well, so why don't you give an overview then, Laura, of what, I don't know, what exactly what is it exactly that you're offering in this 9-month curriculum?
All right. I know I tend to get a little metaphorical, but that's the answer to your question, though, is I'm trying to build up immunity to irrationality with an armor of verifiable truths that each individual can verify for themselves. And with this, you gain this empowerment to serve these teens for a lifetime. Okay, so what I offer in these presentations are new insights into nature that weren't offered in public curriculum, that will shake your foundations so that you look at and observe differently and then act differently towards your geographical surroundings. And you will, as we go into the different sciences, which I classify under like the unified sciences because they're all one and the same, this compartmentalization has been a detriment to our growth and our understanding. So human health, and really looking at what human health is and what disease is. So these are a big portion of this, and to really understand the mind-body connection, and also the human to human connection, and human to community connection, and human to earth connection. And looking at all of that in the present day, but also over time, because we've really changed the way that we feed ourselves in every area. So that's just something to look at, but I can't go too deep into each section. But we also look at modern governments, modern so-called developed countries, and their organized structure, and very matter-of-factly go through that. We don't just overview it; we go through it with a fine-tooth comb. Not like anything anyone ever experienced in public curriculum, but this is what people learn when they're training to be attorneys. I feel like most judges know most of these things, but at our level, at the level of the basic citizen, we're not taught these things. And so we should know, if we're going to stamp ourselves with a status, we should know what that status means. Righto?
Oh, absolutely.
And without your help, this would take a much longer for me to comprehend myself and be much more convoluted. So I'm really glad that that I have this philosophical muscle, but that you have this, you can really put it all into context for me.
Well, we are, next week's guest is Brandon Joe Williams, who is in this space of sovereignty and freedom and really understanding the structure of our government and our banking system, and how it's intertwined into, it's a corporation. But I don't want to digress too far into that. But as a kid, like, we never were exposed to any of this. Instead, you have to say the Pledge of Allegiance, and you have to vote, and we didn't really even learn civics, not even at my level. I graduated high school in 1995, and I didn't get a good education in civics until I was, almost out of college, because what we got in high school was, it was very, very minor, and so that's something that kids need to understand. If you don't have a country, if the only thing that you can do is vote, if that's all you can do to make change is vote, well, then you have no power, and you don't really have a country. You have something that's masquerading as something else, and they're giving you just enough benefits or privileges to make you feel like you have a say. But I would dare say that all of politics and that is just theater. I don't literally mean that it's scripted and that these people are acting, although I would say that there are some people who definitely are, and then there definitely is some things scripted. But I don't want to get too far off in the weeds over there.
But I'm glad to have you as a guest for my course, because you got your mind wrapped around a lot of details that have evaded me because they were boring and they didn't make sense. So as a teen youth myself, once back in the day, that kind of stuff didn't stick because it was trivial and it didn't resonate. So where was it going to stick? Like, I had nothing to associate it with that made any sense. It didn't seem truthful. So that stuff just kind of like floats away. So then I bring it all together with integration at the end of the course. And this is where we really project where we want to go next. This youth charged with using their free will and their choice with a capital C in creating their future lives from a place of empowerment. not a place of compartmentalization, of ideas in a box, boxes that other people have made for them, no matter what that box is. Everyone has a birthright to be here and live their truth. And even those that seem to be harming others are only doing so, in my opinion, from my perspective, because someone made a box for them first. And there's suffering there on both sides. The harmer and the harmee. The person doing the harm is also suffering, and it's harder for most people to see why they're acting that way. But the source is a type of hurt, trauma. Who's to say how far back?
So I think certain viewers, a lot of people's curiosity too would be, I hesitate to use the word practical or pragmatic to describe, sorry, this is my roundabout way of speaking. I'm just going to ask it. Do you guys, so you have your oldest are teenagers. Do they / you have plans on taking a test for a GED or a diploma?
I don't have plans for that for them. So this comes from a place of empowerment. If they want to do something and that something requires them to take a test, then they, as adult decision makers, can decide to prepare for and take a test. And also that test then is a gauge of certain parameters that may or may not describe our daughters or many people. So if these parameters are actually describe how well somebody memorized a specific set of instructions or pieces of information, I won't even call them facts, this might be a parameter that they're being measured on. Did they successfully get milled through the sausage grinder? And out the other end, they pass the test, and they can read how well they went through the sausage grinder by how well they did on this test. I really have no interest. I have no pride in the outcome of them taking a GED test. But along those lines, if they wanted to go to some brick and mortar college, of course, they would have to be explicit in explaining why. Because, I mean, if you ask me, if someone just wants to go to college, that is so broad of a statement and of a desire. What does the going there to the college actually mean? And what does it implicate? What's the desired results there? So until someone can say, I want to go because there's a certain class with a certain instructor, and I'm really excited because, and at the end of it all, I'm going to ... But if someone just says, I want to go to college, that sounds like a memorized statement that means almost nothing, except I'm just going to walk in this direction because I was told to. Mm-hmm. So unschooled people absolutely can get admitted into university. As we have all heard of these young people, 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds being accepted into university, all expenses paid. Because this makes the university look good. And then mostly because universities are placement services, they're recruitment agencies for the national and global business model. So they want talent. So there's talent scouts at the university. If that talent is 10, someday that talented 10-year-old is going to be 20. And already they're going to be bought up by NASA or whatever. For what? The global business model. But what if that person might have grown up to create a course online, offer something amazing to the people, and also have been a millionaire and had a lot more free time, but instead they're given all these awards and medals and accolades and promotions for doing something at NASA, and now they're living their life based on this dopamine that they get from these repeated social rewards. But if my kids want to go to university, Jeremy and I tell them, then you tell that university, you don't ask them if you can be there. You tell them how important it is for them to have you there.
Mm-hmm.
How you are going to help liven up that class and make them look really good with how well you're going to perform there.
Well, I have absolutely zero doubt whatsoever that either of them could pass a GD exam. I'm not concerned with that. I would be concerned, and we have discussed it already with our oldest, who's 16, about the idea of university. And I'm personally not thrilled with sending my kid to a university in today's climate. I have no interest whatsoever in indoctrinating my kid to become like a liberal socialist quasi-communist, and that unfortunately, and I'm not a politically aligned anyway. We already went over that in the first episode.
Sounds like fun.
Oh, I am not a liberal. Okay, we'll put it that way. And I'm not a progressive, and not a 2024 progressive liberal, whatever that means.
Boxes you're not.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever that means. And so, I don't want my kid being emphasized or virtue signaled or gaslit into accepting, like self-mutilation because that's what society thinks is cool, or what you need to be focused on is your sexuality, not what you're here to become. And furthermore, I am not encouraging my children to become cogs. I want them to be entrepreneurs. Yeah. There's you create that. You are the source of value, period. So if you're the source of value, what are you going to do to provide, either service or something useful, tangible,
or to even become
otherwise.
a part of a team where you have a joint vision and all of your skills are handy there.
Right. So we're putting more emphasis on skills and, like, what do you want to do for you? Not who do you want to work for, or what kind of job do you want to do, but what can you do right now to start streams of income that flow into a river, right? And this is all stuff that, you and I, all three of us, we have had to unlearn first. And I am not an entrepreneur yet. I'm, these are all things that we're working towards. I have a lot of skills that were useful in a lot of ways. And so in that way, there's always a gig available for me, but that's not my, that's not a retirement strategy, number one. And number two, it's not what I'm, seeking to do. I want to serve, and I want to serve in very specific areas. And that's sort of what this podcast represents, and other things that we're doing in life as well. And
isn't it difficult, y'all? I find, I'm just going to be real open here, and addressing everybody and potential viewers and potential skeptics. I always we're made up, I think, our personalities of many different persons within us, and I've got all these different minds. I can't help but feel, and it's annoying, I can't help but feel like I'm in debate mode in my mind. Well, if I say this, then I have to answer this for someone else, because what if the opposing thought? And I think that's kind of a helpful thing, because you develop a sense of empathy and a sense of readiness when you're faced with quote-unquote opposition to
yes.
Not sounding like a bumbling idiot, which I feel like a lot of the time, but it's very frustrating to be expected. What we're describing here is an integration of living where the sacred and the profane, the spiritual and the material cannot be and should not be separated. And I find it really, really hard in my day-to-day life to ever feel like, if I'm put in a situation where it has to be, but you're in the material world, now you're at work, clocked in, and I'm not speaking so much specifically to my job. I love my job, and I'm very lucky that I have been included in and helped manifest this thing where I have that, where a lot of people don't. Some people feel like and maybe pragmatically do have to put on a completely different hat than the things that they'd like to talk about, which we are talking about on this podcast, and really honestly putting a lot of ourselves out there to be, when we use words where we're describing to us, which is basic fundamentals of how perturbed university is, and mutilated and manipulated to the point where it has become, where it turns out cogs, and it is this. If we use a word like leftist or woke or things to describe university, then immediately we're setting ourselves up for opposition not opposition to anybody of some sort, to be like, oh, right away, then they're right wing conservative. You know what I mean? Like closed-minded Christians, blah blah. I can only imagine. You know what I mean? So just being real, thinking about that, and trying to traverse all of this is it's tricky. It's tricky for me.
So to me, something I was gonna say, that just to hit on what you just mentioned, is now we have an ideology that is really extremely small in terms of scope and number. And even though it appears that there are, like it's a majority, I don't honestly believe that, because I've talked to people, a lot of different people, and that's not the case. This, and what I'm referring to is, like, we'll call it woke in a sort of loosely knitted together way of thinking. But really what it represents is, if you don't believe how I believe, you're a racist bigot, or like, there is no room for discourse. There is believe what I believe or else. And oh, by the way, that could change tomorrow. And if you don't change along with it, then or else, right? And I don't get down like that. Like, we can agree to disagree and still, like, I'm not interested in being right. I want to be correct. Unless you are a racist.
Real racism is scary as hell.
Right. That's true. But that's, digression from course. So
I was trying to bring it back to the softer side.
Yeah, we'll bring it back to the softer side, and we're losing our beautiful outdoor lighting.
We had a 10% battery warning on our recording device.
Yes.
And I wanted to let people know that if they are interested in learning more about the Full Spectrum course for teens, I am on Instagram as Full Spectrum Course. Mm-hmm. Full Spectrum Course on Instagram.
Do you have a website that people can go to? Or...
No, I have funnels, and I have landing pages that don't have, like, URLs. You just need to find me on Instagram.
I will post those in the show notes. I will post links and URLs in the show notes that can direct them to you, so that they can, anyone that wants to can find you. And
this is the real deal. It's a full-bodied experience. It's going to be absolutely amazing.
And you are kind of networking with other people who are doing similar.
Huge into the unschooling realm.
I don't know if you want to
I'm working with coaches that coach parents that are newer to unschooling, if you will. I'm connecting with moms internationally. And so this has been really helpful for each one of us. I feel like in some ways I have more to offer in terms of navigating law, because we've been able to decipher what's going on in America. That helps us share this information with people that are in Canada and Europe and Australia, which are set up similarly. And that actually lands in the same conversation as homeschooling, because of the authority that people fall under there. They'll allow themselves to be governed by, told whether or not they can homeschool their kids at all. Yeah.
It's things are getting crazy up in Canada, man. She's been hooked up with these Canadian cats, and to hear like some of the things that that are going on just over the border it's not scary. It should just make it clear that if you're not going to rule yourself, if you don't have a plan for yourself, someone does. And I can most assuredly tell you that it is not for your betterment or your enrichment. And so, if you have any sort of alternative ideas, or you think, hey, maybe I should do this thing that, might at least not make me low-hanging fruit should the man come rolling up my driveway, then, you might want to get on it. Because the one thing that we don't have is time. And I'm not saying that from a fear-based place. It's just that, whatever plan whatever plan exists, it is unfolding. And I think, we all kind of recognize that since 2020. Things unrolled and came about pretty quickly. And that's continuing to happen. And I think as we roll into this election season, it's going to get awfully spicy.
Yeah, with a discerning eye, we can look back decade, and then a decade before that, the decade before that, see something has been coming down the pipeline. So something that jumps out at me in the 50s was this switch to formula off of breastfeeding. And when you look at it from here, you go, huh, what was that? And it was all in the name of progress and being modern. And it freed up the mom's hands to do something else. And how many of those mothers were taking Valium back then? So.
Well, to me, this what I would call the status quo feels very unhuman. You know, like, and more, it's a push towards technology. And technology isn't inherently positive or negative, but the way that the direction we're being pushed towards, to me, is extremely negative because it's not human. It
does seem very inhumane. You know, I can't wait to when we have our episode on divine masculinity and femininity. You know, ideally there with females as well. I'd like to ask them their thoughts on divine masculinity, but I think about a lot the for males and females both, not even the gender role confusion, not even the politics of it at all, but the psychology of it. Like, now the mother is all the expectations, man. Like, okay, you got to be a mom, you got to be a good mom, be there for your kid, be a good wife, be there for your husband, and also now be the breadwinner or a partial breadwinner, you know, do that. But girl, you got to do you too, you know what I mean? Like, my God, man. Like,
you got to be a girl boss.
This onslaught of images. You should be doing this. You should be doing this. You need to be doing this. You need to be doing that. You know, and not given an even a half hour meditation in a day hard enough for us who consciously choose a life to where it's not so compartmentalized for us. We create our own compartmentalization.
You should get like 1,000 love letters.
You don't have time for reflection or I don't know. Let me talk about that. So before we wrap up, let's address for us just the most basic grade school, pun intended, question that you get asked if you're thinking along the lines of homeschooling, unschooling, etc. How did the kids get socialized then? Right?
Oh, please.
Right? That's the number one was like, even still I'll hear that from people who are even more consciously developed. Like, well,
overwhelmingly
their socialization.
Overwhelmingly the most asked question that we got. What about socialization? Pretty much in that tone. And the
I think it's just a memorized question.
Well, to me, that the answer to that, I would actually answer that with a question myself. In what does socialization really mean to you? Because I'll tell you what socialization in school meant to me was I learned who were the cool kids, who were the nerds, who were the geeks, who's poor, who were the jocks, who were fun. I learned a lot about chasing girls, and trying to act like I was an adult and to get involved in very adult behavior long before I was mentally mature enough to involve myself in that. I did a lot of drinking and a lot of drugs in my time in high school. And so, I don't know that was very socialized. That did not make me a fully functioning human being. I may have been social, but I was not a fully functioning human. For us, socialization comes from, like, we don't seek to lock our kids away and hide, like, we didn't run away to the woods to hide in the woods and, like, say fuck the system and that's that. We're just staying here now. We want our kids out there, so we get them involved in everything extracurricular that we can. We get them involved in theater. They're in sports, in jiu-jitsu and boxing, and they're out there doing something. The kids are riding horses at friends' house, or they're going camping, or they're in scouts.
Yeah, they're riding horses like without saddles at night, barefoot in the river.
Yeah, like in crazy terrain,
wild and free. Something that I dream of my younger self doing, and never had the freedom to do that. And no pasture horse in the area either. But I think it's been so wonderful for them. As you know, Clayton, because you know them.
But to them, like, it might be interesting to interview one of them and be like, so what was your experience like? They'd be like,
So just like clam up. And
right. dad talks history or mom
Kinda.
tells us
I know,
math. No.
but they actually
My
have
mom
to.
uses us with interdimensional math.
right.
Oh,
Right.
well, come on. Vortex math is fun.
Right.
Well, it's applicable, but again, yeah, it's hard, I guess, because some of the questions I was trying to pose were for solutions for conventional thinkers, but it does seem that full spectrum, by definition of the word, isn't necessarily going to include much conventionality. And I mean, and I think to y'all's, in your family's credit too, and to our credit, because you don't want, like, a conventional life is not necessarily healthy. You know,
We don't want more of the same. That's
no,
for damn sure.
to be well adjusted to what is it? To be well adjusted to
a profoundly sick society
is no measure of good health.
That's right. And you know, something that you just said that I wanted to mention before we wrap up too is, you know, Lori has really had to tweak her branding for that, because even in her own journey of developing this class or this course, it's been her finding, you know, like, no, I don't want another cookie cutter school curriculum. You know, no, I'm not trying to do this just for religious reasons. No, we want critical thinkers. You know, and I've always said to my kids, like, don't take my word for it. I don't want you to parrot what I'm saying. I want you to go out and either try and disprove it or expand on it. Because that really was my approach as I finally got out of school. Like, I hated school, man. You know, like, I could ace tests and, like, do only the minimum amount of work that I had to do to pass. And so I was a solid C student. And it wasn't because I was lazy even. It was because school, like, sucked my will to live in a lot of ways, you know, and all I wanted to do was just do the minimal thing that was required of me and get the fuck out of there, you know. And so it left me with a lot of angst that has taken me far too long, you know, to resolve. And so if we can cut our kids, you know, 20 years off that, then gosh, we're putting them in a pretty damn good position. So, you know, that's more of the emphasis from our approach than, like, here, son, memorize your times tables and, you know, tell me that every capital of every state and all the last 45 presidents, you know, or 47 presidents, or however many there've been up to this point.
What if we freed up the time that we spent focusing on that for making astute observations about what's going on in our own bodies, what's going on in the relationships in our household, and how those households are a micro of the macro? And what are we going to do when we're older as a participant in our community? Like, what do we want to build here? What kind of connections do we make?
Yeah, how are you going to
memorizing presidents' names? How it's not meaningful nor important, but the essence of it is if we can talk about the Magna Carta, perhaps the Bill of Rights, perhaps, or the Mayflower Compact, you know, things like this, these agreements, and really pull, like, hermetic principles, you know, natural law from these things. Now we're getting to some meaning and substance. Whether we ever remember a single name of a single president, other than the ones that have meaningful stories attached to their names, is unimportant.
No, I agree.
Yeah, I do too. But of course, we would, you know, we could be viewed as just an echo chamber unto ourselves here, right? But
meanwhile,
this is what I believe it.
When people optimize their health, they only need to hear the list of presidents once and they're going to lock it in. Right. You know, there's people that can do that. Right. And not just, like, autistic people, for example, this amazing ability they have, because something about them is uncluttered and unobscured. Right?
Yeah.
But we all have that ability. We haven't harnessed it. Take snapshot, forever memory, photographic memory moments. That memorization.
Right on.
And the expectation, again, kind of tying into how I was talking about these assumed gender roles that are just so conveniently plopped on us too. For this, like, not to sound cliche, but this one size fits all thing for kids does not work. I mean, like, I know every kid in person that I know, and person that I work with, learns differently.
All four of ours, well, all three, our kids have proven that to me. How different they each are. And how their strengths are so different from each other, and their weaknesses different. And you have to approach them each differently.
Yeah.
Well, we should, this is anyway.
We are going to lose our battery and losing light, so we're gonna wrap this up. But I think that this has been a good discussion into certainly alternatives to the same old things that aren't working for us all. And we're just trying to share our journeys. I'm not trying to, of course, we're not doctors, and we weren't giving medical, we weren't giving any medical advice. And while we're not certified educators, we also think that, know that education doesn't necessarily happen in those sorts of institutions.
Expertise doesn't come from a certificate, it comes from experience.
That's a fact.
This has been great. As I would say, as always, this is our second podcast, but this is great. This is great.
Right on.
Great talking with you guys.
Likewise.
Heck yeah, full spectrum course. We are the Ubermenschen podcast.
Yes, sir.
We think.
This time for sure.
We are.
Yeah, we are. We're sticking with Ubermenschen because Ubermensch podcast already existed on another platform that didn't show up in search results, but that's okay. We're sticking with this as we're going to build a brand and move forward with it. So I'm really thrilled that this second installment, part of the journey has pretty much come to conclusion, and I'm stoked that Lori got to share her story and her full spectrum course.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. We look forward to having you back sometime in the future, and we'll have you talk to our secretary on your way out.
I'll make sure.
But no, definitely come back. It would make sense if you were on the. I can't wait to do the divine masculine feminine thing, y'all. It's just I think about it all the time.
Awesome.
And stuff like this all the time. And homeschooling, what I'm going to do, and practical, on my own path, what I'm going to do that works for me and works for my family as well. Making moves, and they're not conventional because there's no time for that anymore. It's not working. Conventionality didn't make me a happy person, so.
Absolutely. Well, good deal. Well, with that, I'm going to say that's a wrap. So I'm just Jeremy for the Ubermenschen podcast. Clayton, as always.
Ich bin Uberfrau.
Yes, this is my Uberfrau. So we will absolutely catch you on the next one, which is going to be a big one with Brandon Joe Williams. I'm really excited. I want to mention that one more time. And so we will see y'all on that one. Thank you.
All right. Good night,
Love you guys. Love